So what we're going to do is we're here to expose it, let people tell their story, and let everybody in the public see the horrors of the court system in Suffolk County, New York.
Long Island Backstory. Long Island's news alternative to the Newsday Cablevision news monopoly. With Chief Correspondent Gary Jacobs.
Hi, I'm Gary Jacobs, and welcome to another edition of Long Island Backstory, where we're filming at the Cablevision Studios in Hauppauge, New York. My guest today is New York State Assemblyman Michael Fitzpatrick. Assemblyman Fitzpatrick is really one of the good guys. Whether you agree with him politically, you agree with some of the things, all the things, one thing that nobody could say about Mr. Fitzpatrick is that he's not an honest guy, he's very caring, and he takes his job very seriously. I know one of the things that bothers me about politicians is that there's this political class where they sort of feel like they're removed from everybody else, and a lot of times people will try to advocate for things that they believe in or want to discuss, and they'll try to get into their representative's office, and it's hard to get into them, or they'll give you an aide. And another thing that really bothers me is when people drive up to Albany, and from Long Island, it's a long schlep to get up there. You spend 4 hours to get up there, 4 hours back, and you get there, and they give you a 20-year-old aide to just placate you. And you know what? Anytime we've gone up to Albany, whether somebody's in your district or not, you've always met with them, whether it's an issue that you're interested in, and I really respect that. And I know I've brought up people to Albany and said, hey, we'll stop by my assemblyman's office, and your door is always open, and we've left with people that have had other districts and they can't even get in, and you spend a lot of time, if nothing else, explaining how things work up in Albany, which we don't know how things work. You know, we're lay people, and that's something that I really do appreciate that you do. So welcome to the show, Assemblyman.
Thank you, Gary.
What I wanted to talk about today is a couple of the issues facing Suffolk County. And just recently in Newsday, they asked what are the most important issues on Long Island. And you would think it would be terrorism. We're right near New York City, 9/11. It would be the drug problem. It would be jobs. The most important thing to people is taxes. So that's something that I really think we need to talk about. Right. What is the financial situation of, I guess, Suffolk County specifically and the whole island in general? Where are we at?
Well, first, let me just say thank you very much for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to be here in the Cablevision studios, and these are great programs, because I know when I, channel surf and I see someone I know on channel 20 or 22 with the New York City government channel, or 18, which is the town channel, people really have an opportunity to, if they can't visit you personally, to at least listen to
they get a little bit more time.
So this is great. Thank you very much. The discussion of taxes, and the number one issue on Long Island, the high cost of living here on Long Island, whether it's property taxes, whether it's the cost of housing and the limited supply of certainly rental housing and multifamily housing and other different types of housing stock. We're basically an island of single-family homes, and that needs to change going forward. How we do that is a very interesting discussion. And then the cost of utilities. We are still paying off the debt from closing the Shoreham nuclear power plant, and so that is a double-edged sword. It's bad enough to have high property taxes, but when you have high utility costs, it puts strain not only on property taxpayers, homeowners, but also on the business community, whether it be your large businesses, and we've lost those. Remember when Grumman employed so many people here on Long Island, the aerospace industry? We had a number of small contractors right here in Hauppauge, in the Hauppauge Industrial Park, that used to supply Grumman, Republic, Fairchild, etc. That's all gone now. So we've transitioned from a manufacturing economy to more of a service-oriented economy, and the jobs that we're producing now, because of this high cost of living, taxes, utilities, housing costs, are much lower paying on the private sector side. Now, when you look at the public sector employment situation, we have more and more people working in government. That's not necessarily a good thing when government becomes larger, because it's the high operating cost of government at every level. School districts, towns, villages, the county, and some of these other ancillary districts. In fact, Gary, on Long Island, and this was a comment, this was part of former county executive, Nassau County Executive Tom Swazi's stump speech when he was running for governor in 2006, a campaign that was short-lived. But he said, On Long Island, Nassau, Suffolk County, we have 901 taxing entities. Think about it. 2 counties, 13 towns, 10 in Suffolk, 3 in Nassau, 124 school districts. We have probably 150 plus fire districts, water districts, sanitation districts, which are in Nassau County, recreation districts, lighting districts, and many of them, Gary, have people on the payroll who are in the defined benefit pension system, which is very expensive.
Talk about that.
Also receiving deeply discounted health care, paying little, in some cases nothing at all, toward the payment of health care. As a state employee working in the Assembly, I have to cover 25% of the cost of my health care. You have school districts like Smithtown where they pay, in the new contract, 10, 11, 12%.
Which is unheard of in the public.
And for new hires,
sector.
in the town of Smithtown, new hires have to contribute, but those who've been there forever are paying nothing into their health care plan. So these are benefits that are unheard of in the private sector, but they do cost a lot of money, and this is what contributes to the high tax burden. I believe in the future, certainly over the next 5 to 10 years, Gary, we're going to start having conversations that 10 years ago, people on Long Island in government thought they would never have. You're going to see, I believe, you're going to start seeing a serious conversation about consolidation of school districts.
Which has been off the table.
Which has, for
the
a
last
long
few
time,
years.
been off the table. But when you have 124 little fiefdoms with superintendents.
Some of them are just out of control. When you see these things
They
in the
are.
paper, but we seem to move on, though.
Well, we
you
do,
see in the
but-
paper,
but-
wow, that's horrible, and then everyone moves on and goes back to work.
Well, exactly, but it can only last for so long. We have seen the bankrupting of major cities in this country. Take Detroit, for example. But you have, 2 counties that are relatively affluent. In fact, Nassau County, one of the most affluent counties in the country. That does not guarantee that if you do not handle your public finances responsibly, that you will not have difficulty. And you look at Nassau, you look at Suffolk, you have 2 counties that both have more than $100 million annual structural deficits. You have both counties, $300 million in Suffolk, over $200 million in Nassau County, that are borrowing against the pension fund, the state pension fund, to meet their annual obligations to fund their own pensions.
So that's going to catch up.
So it's putting it on the credit card over the next 10 to 12 years. It's kicking the can down the road. You're paying.
But can they
much
default?
higher. No. Municipalities cannot default. We
So
don't
where does
have
the
that
money, so they
ability.
just have to start cutting back
Well,
on,
they'll have to
or
cut
raise
back.
taxes.
They could raise taxes. Well, the tax cap is in place, which I am very.
But they can still do it, though, right? It's just that
Of course.
they don't get the
You
benefit.
you can go to your community, and 1 or 2 school districts out there have already said they're going to attempt to do this. If you get 60% of the voters approving it, you can pierce the tax cap. So there is a remedy out there. But the remedy is not to eliminate the tax cap. There is legislation in Albany pending that would make it not a 2% or the rate of inflation, whichever is higher as it currently stands, but would go to a straight 2%. So with inflation now at near zero, you're allowing, you would, if this were to pass, and I don't think it will, allow school districts to go right up to 2%. And that's exactly what they will do. So what needs to happen, and this is what I believe over the next 5 to 10 years you're going to see, is that conversation that we all know is coming, that we all know we have to have. Long Island has to change, New York State has to change, but particularly Long Island has to change in how many governmental entities we're going to have, because you have to start slowing down the growth of the cost of government. And most of that cost, Gary, is in your labor costs, all right? And Albany has a lot to do with that because we passed the labor laws. You talk about binding arbitration, which unfortunately, as you see in the bandage, I've been home recuperating from throat surgery, but if I had been there, I would have been the lone no vote in the Assembly they passed a 3-year extension of binding arbitration.
What I don't understand is you talk about them voting against it. So I remember when the President Obama was elected the second time,
Yeah.
and everyone came in and said, we don't like Obamacare. And he said, well, basically there was a referendum. They voted for me.
Yeah.
And we're looking right now, there's all this talk. Everyone complains about how high our taxes are,
Yeah.
but we elected the same people who are responsible for it. So
know.
if I'm one of those politicians, didn't they get it for a referendum?
Well,
As to say,
in a
and
sense
people
they
don't
did.
care.
But you know what? We're having, if you go back 3 years, when we reelected Barack Obama. Obamacare was passed, but we didn't really know how expensive, how bad, if I may use that word, because I do believe it is the outcome has been bad in terms of Obamacare. And you look at the presidential election, here it is March 3rd, we're taping this. You look at the groundswell of support for someone like Donald Trump, who is running an anti-establishment campaign. When you think of, at the federal level, $19 trillion of debt that we owe the rest of the world, and you look at how is Obamacare working out now? People are very frustrated. The deductibles are extremely high, which means people's out-of-pocket costs are astronomical, and the level of coverage is nowhere near what President Obama had promised. And you're not keeping your doctor, as he said you would be able to do. So now here we have another referendum coming up this November, all right, one that I'll participate in as a candidate for state office, but it's a presidential year, so we know turnout is going to be somewhat higher, probably very much higher this year, and that is, it's a referendum on, do we want another 4 years of the policies of Barack Obama in the person of Hillary Clinton, or are we going to see a change and go with someone either like Donald Trump or a Marco Rubio or a Cruz or a Kasich? They're the only ones that are left on the Republican side.
But on Long Island, it seems like
and on Long Island,
we're not there yet.
Exactly.
You're talking about it, but you're the lone
right,
person.
But I'm a lone voice. Well, I'm a lone voice today. But as, there's an old expression that I constantly repeat. People don't change, Gary, when they see the light. Right. They change when they feel the heat. And that heat is
rising.
It's rising. We're seeing it now in the frustration. Look at our own school district in Smithtown. We're going to have to close, or they are going to close, one of the elementary schools. You have a declining enrollment. Why is enrollment declining? Young families are not forming. It's not like the 50s and 60s and 70s when people came out here, had 2 or 3 kids. They filled our schools. You had plentiful jobs. You had industry out here. That has all changed in the last 2-3 decades. Now, because of the high cost of living here, taxes, utilities, and housing, families are not forming. Kids are getting married much later. They're living in back home with their parents for much longer periods of time. My oldest daughter, didn't get married until she was 30. I got married at age 24. It's kind of interesting how the kids. It's different now, but all that has an effect on. We built all of these schools, but we can't keep them filled.
But is that going to help us though, if there's not as many kids? Because that's a big.
I don't think so, because we are you need all age groups. We need our old folks. We need their wisdom, and quite frankly, when they're retired, we need their disposable income too. Right. That's important. It's all about economics. You need we need families.
But we lost our when we talk about needing the whole spectrum. I think becoming a service economy, we can just implode. We have almost no manufacturers, just deleting every day. To me, our economy can just collapse at the bottom because there's nothing there.
Well, here is an important statistic. When you look at this, is provided from research done by the Empire Center for Public Policy up in Albany, one of the premier think tanks in New York State. The average Long Island salary for public sector workers, public sector, is $71,000 plus. The average salary for the private sector is just over $53,000. So that's quite a gap. Right? So the weight of government on this economy, the cost of government, the operating cost of government, is getting heavier and heavier each and every year. And you look at laws like binding arbitration, all right, which the police department is very, they want to keep that. And I've been
it's worked well for them.
It has, and when you and it's one of the reasons why they come after me every 2 years, because I'm always the lone vote against it, and I say, look. We simply can't afford this.
Are they killing the golden goose, or does it not matter because they'll always be funded?
Well, I believe eventually they will kill the goose that lays the golden egg, and quite frankly, this is where, and I'm criticized sometimes and say, oh, you're anti-union. I'm not anti-union. What I am opposed to, I'd have no problems with unions, but I have a real problem with unchecked union power.
Like they did in Detroit.
There's no counterbalance or counterweight in Albany to the power of the unions. And the reason for that is that any union is going to endorse and support someone who's going to tell them yes. Right. It's what they want. Right. We want more money, we want benefits, better benefits, we want less work. You give that to us, we're going to support you. And it doesn't matter whether it's the Democratic Party, quite frankly, or the Republican Party. They have historically gotten a lot of what they've wanted. And when someone says no, they come at you with everything they've got, believe me.
To send a message.
They attempt to not only defeat you, but also to send a message.
I think in your campaign, it was you
I-
were going to win, but they sent the message to you.
Well,
or to everybody else, really.
you know, the message hasn't changed my message because I still got 65% of the vote, but I was the #1 target of the Suffolk County PBA and the #1 target of the New York State United Teachers. And because of the proposals, I have one piece of legislation in that I fight very hard to try and build support for, but everywhere I go, this is what I talk about, because people say, what can we do about reducing the cost of living on Long Island? And I'm telling you, it's very simple. We have these unfunded mandates. There are 3 that I believe are the most important that have to be addressed. 1, you need a 2% cap on binding arbitration. And this is the problem because when you look at these police contracts, we're going to have superior officers and detectives that are going to make $227,000 in base salary at the end of this current contract, which expires in 2018. And your regular police officers are making well above $150,000. So we pay them well, they do a good job for us, but can we sustain this? The answer is no. That's item 1. Item 2, the Triborough Amendment of the Taylor Law. The Taylor Law in New York State is the governing body of law for public employees. The Triborough Amendment, so-called because it was the result of a court case involving the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority, ultimately the ruling was in Triborough, when a contract expires, all provisions of that contract remain in full effect until a new agreement is ratified. Now, I have proposed tweaking that just slightly in one way. The automatic step increases, which are the automatic pay increases, they continue to go up and up and up, even though there's no contract. Now,
So there's no
one of
incentive.
my school districts in my district, for years, the superintendent would argue, and I have taken up this cause, and this is why I have this provision. When their contract expired, the union representative told the superintendent, we are in no hurry to get to the table because we have Triborough. All right? So 3%, 3%, 3%, and they'll complain, oh, we don't have a contract, we don't have a contract. Don't cry any tears for them because every provision is in effect.
And I remember
They're
hearing people, they go out there and they say, well, look, we haven't gotten a raise. But they get a raise because they're getting their
They
step
get the automatic
increases.
step.
So,
They're not getting a negotiated
Right.
raise, but
But
they never tell you about the
No,
step
right.
increases. So, this is the nuance, and the average citizen, the average taxpayer, the average homeowner is not paying attention, in a sense, to that level of detail. And my colleagues in government are not talking about it the way I do. And all I'm saying is people need to understand this. So that is number 2. First, 2% hard cap on binding arbitration. Second, a modification of Triborough. Contracts, when they expire, the automatic steps cease until a new contract is ratified. 2. Now, number 3, which is also extremely important, and that is new hires, all right, except police and fire because they have a different situation, but all new hires, whether they be teachers all the way down to anyone else in the public sector, need to go into not the traditional defined benefit system because we can't afford it any longer. They must go into a defined contribution platform. Now, we already have that platform working for us in New York State. In fact, Gary, Governor Cuomo, when he proposed a change to Tier 6, or proposed Tier 6 to slow down the growth of these pension costs, he proposed that new hires be given the option to go into the defined contribution program or the traditional system. Now, we already have the traditional, a defined contribution system out, and this is what Governor Cuomo proposed, that they go into the system that's already in place and working for our SUNY instructional staff. Now, the State University of New York, the largest state university system in the country, even larger than California, 64 campuses, and that includes your community colleges. And Suffolk is the largest of the community colleges in the state. They have been using the defined contribution, which is managed by TIAA-CREF, a very prestigious organization that focuses on teachers in the education industry primarily, although it's open to everyone. They operate and manage that program. And 70% of the instructional staff in SUNY uses the defined contribution option. Why? One, because it works. Two, it's lower cost, but it's portable. It allows people in higher education, teachers like to move. You know, they'll go from SUNY Stony Brook to Harvard. Well, because of the portability, they're not handcuffed to the defined benefit system in the state of New York, which says, I can't move if I only have a few years to go before I retire. I can't give that up. So it limits people's ability to move, and it also restricts your ability to better utilize your human resources. But because of that portability, if they go from school A to school B, they take that account with them. And it's a much lower cost plan to operate, and the returns are very, very good. Now remember, these are our university professors. They're not stupid people.
Right.
They're not going to do something that's not in their best interest, and yet 70% of them use it. So if it's good enough for our state university professors, it's certainly good enough for our K-12 teachers and anyone else in the private sector. And this is what we have to do. These three items specifically, in my humble opinion, are what we need to do to reduce or slow down the growth of these labor costs, which are adding to pension costs. It's property tax increases causing these property tax increases. It has to be done, Gary. My colleagues, too many of my colleagues, just refuse to talk about it because, quite frankly, they don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to have that argument, and it will cause an argument with labor. But you have to, and I have my relationship, they don't support me, but I don't fight with them. All right? I have a good, I can talk to guys like Nick Lamort at CSEA or any of the others. We have a respectful relationship, or John, the Long Island Federation of Labor head. We get along fine. We agree to disagree, but we have, I stake out a reasonable argument. If we don't slow this down, we're seeing when you have, and you look at those average salary figures, over $71,000 versus $53,000, it can't go on like that. And anything that can't go on won't, as Herb Stein once said. He was President Nixon's head of his Bureau of Economic Advisors, and his father was Ben Stein's father. But he said anything that can't go on won't. And we see that. We saw it in Detroit. We see it in other areas that have collapsed because what happens is your tax base, the wealth that's created by the private sector, which is taxed to fund the operation of government. If that tax base isn't strong, and especially if it's not growing, it will not last. And we're starting to see that now, whether it's school closures in local school districts, or you see a lot of the one-shot gimmicks used in the county of Suffolk, like selling the Denison building, the lag payroll. The lag payroll, you're not paying people now for a period of 10 days, but you're going to pay them at a much higher rate later.
Right.
So it's short-term, it's like a sugar high that you pay for later. Yeah. So these are, and the worst, what I think is the worst thing we could possibly do is, put in casinos, which I vehemently oppose.
I look at them as a tax on the poor, but what's your reason for, to me, it's just it becomes a political patronage thing to feed the machine.
That's all it is.
It's a tax on the poor people, and if it's too convenient, people are suffering here, and they say, you know what, maybe I'll go hit it big. To me, it's taking advantage of poor people, and it brings in a bad element. What's good about it?
Exactly. And the sad thing is the controversy over the Medford site is leading Suffolk to look at literally the Marriott Islandia, which is literally a stone's throw from where we're sitting right here, which is in my district, and I'm hot under the collar about it, and will fight it vigorously. But look, we have gambling in New York State. We have horse racing.
But you can gamble if you want to gamble. You can go to Atlantic City. You can go to Vegas. You want to gamble?
You want to go to Connecticut.
Go to Queens.
You can do that. Go to Resorts World in Queens. You can do that. But when government believes, because horse racing is not as popular and the handle is way down and people just don't go to the track like they used to, the whole purpose of OTB, frankly, no longer exists. OTB in New York City went out of business. It was allowed to fail. We have an OTB in Suffolk County that is in bankruptcy and has not made a profit since, I think, 2008. All right? Yes, they have about 250 jobs. But we are going to go into not horse racing, but they are on a path to become a full-fledged casino. Think about it for a minute. Back in 2013, Governor Cuomo pursued a constitutional referendum to allow non-Indian gaming, all right? So we have Indian casinos, and because the Indians are sovereign nations, they are not governed by the state of New York, or the federal government for that matter. You enter into a compact with the state of New York to share some of the revenue with these casinos. So now it passes in New York State in 2013, but what people on Long Island, in my opinion, Gary, believed is that if you voted in favor of those 7 casinos, 4 for upstate, 3 for downstate, and the 3 downstate casinos are not going to be allowed to open until the 7 years is up, all right, to give the 4 upstate casinos a chance to gain a little bit of momentum. Now, you have Resorts World in Queens, you have Yonkers at the Yonkers Raceway, I think that's Empire Casino. You need one more. Suffolk wants to be that one, okay? Now, why do they like Suffolk? Well, it's on the way to the Hamptons. It would be on the expressway, easy access, easy on, easy off. But the problem with the county going into the casino business, Gary, is one, it is not as a revenue stream. The industry is going through real gyrations right now. There's a saturation. You have the 2 casinos up in Connecticut. One of them is struggling to make bond payments. All right. We've seen 4 casinos close on the Strip in Atlantic City, and 2 or 3 more are teetering on the brink. New York City, under the former Speaker Sheldon Silver, would not allow one of those downstate casinos to be in Manhattan. All right. Because,
I wonder why he didn't
in the city. Well, because he knows it's a tax on the poor, right. and a tax on those, and it creates social problems. X%, and we don't know how much, but X% of the people who go into any casino are going to come out addicted.
Right.
Now, it's not a huge percentage, but that has an impact on social service costs, right. which has a direct effect on your tax bill. So why is government using vice and the expansion of a vice to fund operations that should be drawn from the tax base? It doesn't make sense. It's wrong. In my opinion, it's morally wrong to deliberately entice people to come in who will no doubt, in certain cases, be spending their mortgage money, their children's education money, and their paychecks, as well as any social services payments that they get, and end up even deeper. Lives will be shattered. And for a government to pursue that line of revenue is, to me, morally reprehensible. And I don't want to see anyone lose their job at OTB, but you know what? They'll be able to absorb some of these jobs. Through attrition, you can move them elsewhere. But to grow this into a full-fledged casino, which is what they want to do, they'll never get rid of. And there will be patronage. In fact, a little inside baseball, there was an argument that they had, Suffolk OTB with Delaware North, the company that is funding this expansion. The county wanted to control the hiring. Delaware North said no. So how that ultimately got resolved, I don't know, but there was an argument over who's going to control the hiring.
Who do you think's going to do it?
The political leaders or the company that's running the business. So. Yeah.
Well, Assemblyman, thank you very much for
Gary,
taking the time, even with your surgery.
This was fun.
It shows your dedication.
Thank you. My voice lasted longer than I thought.
You did great. I'm Gary Jacobs, and again, thank you for joining us at Long Island Backstory. If you'd like to learn about more about Assemblyman Fitzpatrick, he's got a website that talks about all his issues. And if you're up in Albany, knock on his door. He's always welcome anywhere you are on Long Island. I know he's always one of the few people who will listen to you and also educate you on how Albany works, which is important.
Happy to speak to anybody. Room 458 in the Legislative Office Building in Albany.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you
very much.
This was fun. Thank you.